Greetings.
All right, hello, how's it going?
Welcome back to the Theolitos Way. So my name's Theo,
I'm Daniel.
and we're here to talk about plasma beings. And this has been coming up in the zeitgeist a lot. The idea of plasma, the fourth state of matter, as some are calling it, and how we're starting to notice it's everywhere and in everything. The sun is essentially a giant plasma being. And there's a lot of talk right now about research and findings, and as well as, perspectives that plasma itself is conscious, and that a lot of the beings visiting us that are now becoming more openly discussed in the human collective some of them at least, might be plasma-based beings. And they relate it with higher dimensional types of consciousness. And there is definitely an element of truth to this. Back in probably roughly 2011, maybe very early 2012, I began to look into plasma physics. It was a very kind of random thing that came across my feed. And I was reading what was said about it. And the reason I was drawn to it was because of the way plasma was discussed to work was exactly how I related to how energy felt in my meditations and my chi practices and things like that. It just made sense in a very deep level. And so fast forward here, many years later, it's becoming a very open topic for conversation. And so I figured we would dive into that. What is plasma from a sense of the life and reality creation process? What is a plasma being? How does that relate with ideas of higher consciousness and higher dimensional realms? And is there anything you want to share before we get into that?
Yeah, that's a great intro. Thank you. I thought the same thing, in my feed and kind of in the world lately. It's been coming up a lot, like, what is intelligence? How does intelligence work, and how does sentience work as well, relating to that plasma idea of, like, because we're here in these human bodies perceiving this reality, how we perceive it through our physical lenses, assuming that they work for most of us. Thank God for all the eye doctors out there. And we see things through that perspective, which allows us to kind of construct our reality. And oftentimes I've thought in my life, as I'm sure you've had these thoughts, well, how does intelligence lay itself out in the dimensional plane? As you start interfacing with other beings. A lot of people have seen orbs, communicated with beings in the astral form. How does this all work? And even just the concept and the idea, what does this kind of bring up for us to talk about today? So those are kinds of the things I wanted to get started with and see where it goes. We're all having fun with this topic right now, and it's a good time for it. So.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you for that.
Of course. So do you want to share maybe, is there an experience that led you to the realization of, like, consciousness and higher dimensionality in a way that you would like to describe it, for the audience who might not have had those experiences?
That is a 20-year process and then some. But what I can say is, so probably what helped me the most were specific meditations where they were designed to connect a person with their dimensional embodiments, usually based on the three dantians in Chinese medicine, focusing on them in a way that very directly connects you kinesthetically to the experience. And I learned these meditations, of course, everybody who taught them in the Western arena always acted like it was their secret meditation. No, it's ancient. Many people have had it. But essentially what it always revolved around was the idea of, a lot of people visualize chakras.
Yeah.
So instead, what connects you with it from a feeling level and connects you with the visceral experience of whatever that energy center represents and bridges you into feeling the dimension or function. You can say mechanic. I like saying function because it's less mechanical sounding, but the function of your being, right? And as you do this, it's kind of like the difference between trying to visualize moving your arm and just moving your arm, because you're connected with it. You don't have to think about it. It's instinctual. So these meditations are designed to do that with our different layers, and they're super simple. All it is a way of directing your feeling attention into those aspects of yourself and bringing them to still awareness and just totally absorbing into them until, and over time, you bridge into that. You start to experience it. Then, of course, the mind will get entertained by the experience, and it will try to take control of it or whatever. And you go, no, just back to the simplicity of feeling. And what happens is the actual intelligence within the self, the innate, as Chiron would put it, that is already creating all this and knows how to awaken and bring things back and start working with it differently, that starts to wake up within us. And the mind has learned, the ego perspective has learned to let go to it, right? Mm-hmm. Because the ego mind's more like a mirror, right? If you're looking in a mirror and you see a chair reflected in the mirror, you can't move that chair by trying to grab the mirror. You have to actually make contact with the chair. The ego mind is like a mirror, a very limited one. And so to actually make contact with these aspects of ourselves, we have to let ourselves sink into that deep consciousness, that innate that's already there, that's just maybe been going along with the program. It starts to wake up. It starts to remember itself, its beingness, and it starts to, oh, I remember this, and things start to move. Then the ego mind might try to catch us, say, okay, now how do I leverage that? Nope, let it go. Go back to it. And what will happen is you'll be in that, probably that true, I would like to suspect that true state of awakeness where you're beyond the mind, where you are just being that divine embodiment. And then the mind takes on its original role, which was an observer, a coherence, an observational coherence mechanism, essentially, but not trying to control it. It ends up being connected to everything, but not trying to run everything. And then it finally serves a purpose as just giving us a unique perspective, but without trapping us in it. So, and this does play into dimensional stuff and plasma here in a second. We'll get into how that works.
Very cool. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I liked how you were describing that as far as like, kind of giving us the ability to drop in, and almost feel that sense of the example that you used of the thinking about moving your arm versus moving your arm. Mm-hmm. I've had these experiences in meditation where I've, been able to sort of see the plasma form of my arm, and almost like it was in my mind, but I sensed that it was beyond my mind even. It was almost diving into the imaginal realms. And I could feel the touch on my own skin from the imagined version of my hand. And I thought, well, wow, if we can really extend outwardly like that in our consciousness, what are the possibilities on other levels? And, I've had contacts as well where it's been visceral. Beings are there and they can change forms, and it's, in my closed eye meditation or even in person, I've seen various beings show up that way. And it was filtered through my own lens of experience, what I could, I guess you could say, imagine or create within that realm. Mm-hmm. And then we were able to communicate on that level when that link was established and that connection was made. And I can even feel that in human conversations sometimes as well. It's like, to know what you mean or what I mean, on some level, you and I have to make the agreement that we're going to link somewhere.
Yes.
Yeah. And do you have any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, and if you only link from the mind in the way that we usually relate with the mind, you can only see what your mind will allow. Mm-hmm. Right. So, whenever I trained with, there was a particular path that they called it a divine feminine path. It was called Transforming Cellular Memory. I definitely recommend it for anyone who's been maybe they've gotten into things like spiritual ideas, psychic ideas, and but they're too mental and they need to really drop into the levels we're talking about. I highly recommend this because they're all about getting into the body and really which bridges you into the actual beingness of everything that's going on to create and co-create. And, they work with, they say Holy Spirit. They consider it the divine feminine aspect of God. And it is the one thing with the chi. When you feel it, it's this pure, just pristine consciousness that you could feel it as almost like a universal plasma being that everything else is like little micro expressions of. And they really drop you into that. And, the whole thing is about they talk about how whenever you're conversing with someone, instead of just listening from the mind and watching them from the mind, you can let your eyes hear, or your eyes see and your ears hear, or if you're synesthetic, maybe it's the other way around, who knows? Mm-hmm. But nevertheless, you could do that, but be within your being and feel. Drop into the presence of the communication. Mm. Many of the beings that we've experienced, a lot of times they'll show up, whether it's angelic beings or whatever, they'll show up and they don't have to say anything. They're just there. And the mind will say, well, you're going to say something. But if you drop in, you'll realize their beingness, their presence is the communication. Mm. Not just in the sense that they're there, but they are communicating by the state of their very being what they have to share as who they are in that moment. And you could feel that from those areas, those layers, which is very connected with that plasma embodiment, as we can call it. Does that?
Yeah, that lands for me. It's fascinating. I was wondering, do you have an example of an experience that you might have had maybe recently that could sort of highlight that a little bit more in
Yes.
depth? Okay, cool.
So whenever, and I've had this happen with people, I've actually had this happen with a Buddhist monk. It was great. One of the few people that synced up with me that well. In fact, I'll use them as an example because it's relatable first. But what happened with us, I was already learning with, whether you want to call them ET beings and it's definitely happened with what I would consider angelic beings. It's happened with, whenever I feel I've been connecting with Yeshua or any of these divine loving expressions. And so I was at the stupa in Sedona, and I was just really in that place. And I was in that place with nature. And I was just being in that embodiment, like fully grounded, connected, completely beyond the mind. And there was this Buddhist monk that was taking people through and showing them the stupa. And he and I synced up. And the second, we never had to say anything. The second we did, he just looks at me and he nods and he's like,
wow.
And it was just there. And it was this perfect syncing, no thought, we just were. Our presence was the communication.
Wow.
And we were synced up in that communication so as we were one in that moment. And we've heard people like Bashar talk about this.
Right.
Or the channel being Bashar, Daryl Anka being the channel, talks about how the deepest form of telepathy, you can say telepathy, but they say telepathy to include the empathy aspect of it. You're not sending and receiving thoughts in the way we think about it. You sync up so fully, you are having the same experience together at the same time. And to add to that, I'd like to say, and you're bringing your unique perspective, flavor to that same thought experience at the same time. This is where you become literally one, yet you're still your own being. And so it's kind of like that. Does that help?
Yeah, that does help. And how do you feel like, because we're moving into some pretty interesting times already. We've been, so far on our planet. Because I can sense that within humanity, we all feel this desire to connect more with each other.
Yes.
Our planet as well, the beings and the nature, the plants, the animals, etc. So could you get into a little bit of why that's so important for evolutionary purposes or for the purposes of exploring our own being and how that could connect?
Yes. Okay, well, let's start with this. Let's say we kept going on as it was anyway, but we're about to, from everything we can tell, be interacting with other kinds of beings that don't communicate the same way we do. If we don't learn this, which actually is very natural, I'm finding, it's like the more I dive into this way of being and communicating, the more it's like, oh yeah, this is who we always were. It just makes sense. The more I do that, it's like, it's almost frustrating to go back to the typical word version, but you have to with people because we have to be able to feel comfortable with whatever communication we're having. And that's just respect for others, right? But if we're going to start interacting with beings, let's say, who are not the typical, we need to be able to like really perceive them cleanly, or else we'll project all kinds of stuff on top of them from whatever fears or anxieties we haven't really faced or dealt with. I mean, we do that with each other all the time, right?
Yeah.
Like people we love, maybe we've lived with for years, and they say one wrong thing, and all of a sudden we blow up this huge idea of what they meant and what's going on, and we're completely wrong. And they're like, what the heck is going on, right? And then they do it, and it becomes this cycle of conflict. And then when you finally get a moment just to chill out and just kind of let unwind, suddenly you start dropping your heart and you realize, maybe we should actually get clarity with each other. And then you find out that wasn't what was happening. That wasn't the intention. And you're realizing that you guys just got triggered and blown up and you completely misconstrued the experience.
Right.
And then you can have a chance to heal. How much easier is it to do that with beings that we're not even used to on the conscious level?
Right.
Like, this is a real challenge in the narratives right now, because depending on how someone views the world, they're automatically going to put that over any being we run across. And they'll act like they're the ones that know what's up. And at the end of the day, for me, I wanted to find out for myself. And that's what I prefer to share with others, get to where you feel confident doing that, and then find out for yourself. And then share your experience, and all the different experiences, we find where they meet. And that alchemy that's underneath all the, let's say, perspective limitations, but where it all meets, that's what becomes the pure truth that's being revealed. And, okay, well, but let's go back to why this is also important.
By the way, I like that word, perspectual. That's
perspectual.
good.
We'll coin that.
Quote that.
Right in the dictionary. It's fine.
We'll find a meeting later.
Yeah. So, now let's talk about with things like nature. We have this. When we're in the mind within our interactions with nature, we are limited by whatever cultural conditioning we got, whatever definitions we put on our relationship with nature. And let's be real. If we look at the world and how things have gone since we've been doing that, this idea of taking dominion at all costs, it hasn't gone well. It really hasn't. Like, you have to run some pretty clever mental gymnastics to say, this is how it should be going. And I feel like anyone with any level of observation and who are willing to put aside whatever their financial obsessions are, or how they feel like it should be for the benefit of the few that they're okay with, we put it aside and just look at it, it's like, maybe we could do things better. I understand all the different perspectives because I've been in all of them at some point. But whenever we drop into the type of communion we're talking about, the ability to commune on these levels, we start feeling these connections with nature. We start intuiting healthy dynamics versus unhealthy dynamics that are just being justified in very clever ways. And we start to realize that we are a part of nature. Yes, we are, in my personal perspective, divine beings. We are divine souls. In a sense, you can say we're like guests here. But we are also a part of this. By the very nature of our body, by the very nature of that we're breathing this air, we are part of the expression of this. And we've been given the opportunity to go off the rails or choose to be in harmony. And I feel like, because if you look at nature, when it's not disturbed, when it's allowed to unfold and evolve, in some way, it always finds a harmonious overall benefit. Whether you want to say things are kept in balance in an appropriate way or whatever. And I feel like we're still not even seeing the best examples of this, because we've been observing nature in my opinion, in a fallen state. And any spiritual tradition you look at pretty much says, yeah, like what we're experiencing right now is not what the truth of what it can be, right? It's a very asleep version. It's a very conflict-based version. It's a very us versus them-based version. And even in that, nature somehow finds a way to perpetuate growth and thriving when it's allowed to. When she's allowed to, however you want to put it. And, you know, it's funny. I recently heard Greg Braden talk about how they're actually showing that, you know, species that work together in symbiosis are far more successful in their ability to thrive than those that rely on the usual predator-prey dynamics.
Right.
It's right there. And so in order to learn how to like feel and see deeply into our world and each other and how to find those real win-win solutions, I believe we have to learn how to drop into these layers of communion and feel, see, and know from there, because that's actually where we're more connected as one. The ego mind is the only thing that creates the idea of us versus them. It's the only thing. It is not inherent in the nature of who we are when that releases. And so, coming back to that, well, first off, does that answer your question about like why that's important for this time? Like also working through things like the crazy conflicts we have. We're caught up in minutia thinking and thinking we need to attack each other to somehow be safe. And you come to find out underneath all that, we want the same things.
Yeah,
Like,
it does. And I like how you also connected it in a big part with nature and how nature moves, you know, because a lot of people can observe nature, especially if you're in a place like this, you know, a forest, and you can sort of feel and sense that dynamic of the symbiosis and how that works. You know, human beings have been observing nature for as long as we've been here, and you know, whether
to some extent
consciously or not, you know, you know, we pick things up around us, like, you know, every sound we've ever heard, for example, is like something that stays with us and it's ingrained within us and it's a part of us, you know. And so operating from that perspective, from a much more conscious lens, it feels like that's what's allowing us to maybe awaken into that intelligence that, you know, would be able to sync up with certain types of plasma consciousness or consciousness in other realms. It's amazing how you were able to link those two perspectives and also give people just some tools essentially to look at things in a different way. So.
And we will be doing actual videos with like games you can play, things you can do to tap more into this for sure. And many of them are personally modified versions of things I picked up elsewhere. I'll give credit where it's due. I believe in that.
Yeah.
And I want to go back to something though.
Yeah.
Because we've gone down some very important topical arenas, or at least little segues that hook into this.
Right.
But I want to get back on the main trail here. So the plasma, in my understanding, my current perspective, if you've heard people talk about chi, any of that kind of stuff, right? That is plasma. It seems less intense than, let's say, the sun, which is pretty obvious because the charge is not as intense. It's not as, in a sense, it's not as coherent in one kind of frequency, and it's just not as highly charged. Highly charged plasma that is very coherent becomes like what we normally think of, where we see stars or plasma balls or plasma beings. And in ancient times, you know, they talked about how some of the higher evolved beings that were on this earth, whenever they showed up, it looked like they were glowing, right? The aura, right? That plasma embodiment was glowing because there was a higher charge and coherence in their being. And so they appeared to be lighter than everyone else around them. And then whenever we start moving into things like higher dimensional consciousness that goes beyond that, we start going into places where like time and space isn't even a thing. Plasma, to an extent, is still an identity. It's still like sort of an identity thing, right? maybe more openly connected and seeing the whole picture, but there's still a personal perspective and being interconnected with all. In the higher plasma states, to me, that's where you are able to see multiple timelines, you're able to see through time, you're able to choose more freely. And that's one reason why, whenever people start really ramping up their energy, if they don't know how to maintain coherence and centering, they can kind of lose themselves in it because they're picking up on all these things and they don't know, how do you stay grounded?
Yeah.
And so, to me, this is why the Qigong masters, whenever they taught about developing, or the internal alchemy, the Taoist alchemists, they really started you right here with this center of gravity area, because you need to build that closest coherent plasma connection and that grounding in the body and that central alignment, and really feel that and let that consciousness develop, so that whenever you begin to bridge into these other aspects of the self, you're able to navigate it with integrity and coherence and a sense of safety, even if just like perspective safety. And anyhow, so you start going into higher dimensional planes, and that's even higher than that. And this is where you start getting to where everything is a singular frequency, and you're kind of, time and space doesn't really exist, but you can play with the idea of it, but it's all happening at once, you can feel it. And it's really difficult to discuss in our English language at this time. That's probably the hardest thing with any of this information, is the limitations of language, especially the English language. But we're working on that.
Yeah. Into it.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching.